I never thought hosting a Super Bowl party would blow up my relationship, but here we are. Let me back up. My sister, Jen, and her boyfriend came over to watch the game since my boyfriend, Ryan, was on a work trip. It was the first time in months that I'd laughed until my ribs hurt. Jen reenacted the infamous spicy dip incident from 2012, and we stayed up until 2 in the morning just hanging out. There were no eggshells or overthinking, and for a few hours I managed to forget how heavy everything had felt since Ryan and I moved in together 6 months ago. When I mentioned the party to Ryan the next day, he reacted by saying I was being immature and that having another guy over was inappropriate. Jen's boyfriend, Mark, had left by 10 at night, and Jen ended up sleeping on the couch. Even so, Ryan kept returning to the matter, expressing worry about what might happen if the neighbors saw, and accusing me of behaving like a college kid. I reminded him that he stayed out until 3 in the morning every Thursday for client dinners, but he insisted that networking was not the same as partying. I felt a mix of guilt, maybe I was being careless, and deep confusion. When had watching nacho cheese congeal on a plate ever counted as a wild party? Jen had been my anchor ever since our mother passed 3 years ago, and we never discussed the funeral, or even how I discovered her sitting alone at the kitchen table, halfway through a crossword puzzle. We simply showed up for one another. When I told Jen about Ryan's reaction, she suggested that he was projecting, a thought I was reluctant to accept. Things started to shift when we moved in together. Ryan began working later, brushing off my invitations to watch our favorite show with a tired rain check that never came through. When I brought up planning a weekend trip, he accused me of being clingy and insisted that I needed to get a hobby. So I did. Just last week, when I mentioned feeling lonely, he responded by buying me a gym membership and claiming that I would meet people my own age, even though I'm 29 and he's 34. Then there was the phone situation. He would scroll through my texts as if checking a receipt for errors. Yet if I passed by while he was typing, he would tilt the screen away. I convinced myself it was just about privacy, not secrecy, until I discovered a receipt. I found it in his coat pocket, a receipt for a $500 dinner for 2 at La Mer, dated on the night of our anniversary. He had explained that he had forgotten about the dinner and instead brought home takeout, blaming an insane workload. When I asked him about the receipt, he said it was for a client dinner, and I wanted to believe him. But later, Jen pointed out the math by questioning how our rent could still be split 70-30 if he was taking clients out every week. Jen urged me to check his email, but I refused, holding on to the idea that I was raised to trust until given proof rather than the other way around. Still, the doubt kept me awake at night. Then he canceled our weekend trip to the mountains at the very last minute, saying vaguely that work was simply too hectic, all while avoiding my eyes. I even called his office in an effort to drop off a peace offering coffee, only to learn from his assistant that he was on PTO for the entire week. Confronting him felt like poking a hornet's nest. He accused me of smothering him, tossed a water bottle at the wall, and ended up sleeping at a hotel. I spent that night replaying every argument we had ever had while sitting on Jen's couch. She just quietly handed me tissues and commented that he was making me question my own judgment. The next morning, I looked at our shared calendar and noticed that he had marked the trip dates as times set aside for golf with Jason, his college buddy. Later, when I texted Jason, he mentioned that he hadn't seen Ryan since August. 2 days later, Ryan returned with roses and apologized, saying that work stress had been eating him alive and promising that he would fix things. When I suggested couples counseling, he laughed off the idea, dismissing therapists as people who brainwashed partners into hating each other. So here I am, staring at his half of the closet and wondering whether work stress really explains the lingering scent of perfume on his jacket from last month, the $500 dinner he claimed was for networking on our anniversary, or if his promise to fix things meant working on us or simply lowering my expectations. I don't know if I'm being paranoid or just patient, but I'm tired of dealing with his issues while feeling like I'm falling apart. Jen believes I deserve answers, and deep down I remember the advice that I should never settle for mere crumbs. And Ryan? He's out networking. Again, maybe I'll finally use that gym membership, or maybe I'll just keep sitting here and reflecting, waiting for the courage to ask the one question that might either save us or ultimately break me. Now for the first update. It's been a week since I last wrote, and I'm still here in this apartment that sometimes feels more like a crime scene than a home, ever since my trust was completely shattered. I've been keeping track of everything, the dates, times, receipts, and even how his voice twists whenever he lies. What started as a way to prove I wasn't losing my mind has turned into a survival tactic. One night, while I was busy scrubbing a wine stain off the couch cushion, I accidentally overheard him on a phone call. He must have thought I was in the shower because his voice was low and urgent as he talked about someone who was getting too close and mentioned that they needed to delay something. I froze for a moment, water still running and steam fogging the bathroom mirror, standing in the hallway and dripping onto the carpet while I wondered who he was really talking about. Was it me, Clara, or someone else entirely? Later, after he hung up, I returned to the shower, turned the water to cold, and let it hit my face until I felt numb. A few days later, I found an open folder on his laptop sitting on the kitchen counter, a rare mistake on his part. To my surprise, the password was simply his childhood dog's name, a detail he once shared on our third date. Although the folder was labeled Taxes 2023, its contents told a different story. Inside were dozens of emails sent to someone named Clara. They were flirtatious yet careful, full of compliments about her insight and hints about wanting to meet in person someday. There were no outright confessions, just enough to twist my stomach into knots. When I brought up what I had found, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he sighed almost as if I had asked him to take out the trash. He explained that Clara was just his mentee and complained that I was invading his privacy, claiming he needed space. I felt like screaming, but instead, I calmly asked why he had hidden the emails. His answer was blunt. He said I would have overreacted, and he pointed right back at how I looked in that moment. Work quickly turned into a minefield. After a presentation where I mixed up the quarterly reports, my boss pulled me aside with a look of concern, mentioning that I was usually so sharp. I wanted to open up about the sleepless nights and how my thoughts spiraled every time his phone buzzed, but I just nodded and said I had been fighting a migraine. Then, on Thursday, his mother called. She made a remark suggesting I was lucky he was so patient, insisting that a man needed his space. I couldn't help but picture her sitting on a floral sofa, sipping Earl Grey, and entirely convinced of her son's perfection. I didn't bring up the emails, the $500 dinner, or even the fact that Ryan had started locking his phone face down on the nightstand. Shortly after, I bumped into Clara at a coffee shop near my office. She was ordering a matcha latte and laughing in a way that felt unfamiliar. For some reason, I mentioned Ryan's name, and she blinked in surprise before asking if she knew him from a consulting firm. When I showed her a photo of him, her face went pale. She explained that he was actually the husband of one of her clients and that they had only exchanged emails about helping with investments. She even added that he had never mentioned me. The walk back to my car felt like trudging through cement. I called his office using the number saved in my favorites, but the bored voice of the receptionist told me that Ryan had been working part-time for weeks. Sitting in my car afterward, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, thinking about all the late nights, the missed dates, and those so-called client dinners. It was clear that he had been lying about his job, about everything. That night, he finally admitted the truth while slouched on the couch with a beer in hand. In a matter-of-fact way, almost as if listing groceries, he explained that he had been demoted and claimed it was only temporary. I interrupted him, questioning what exactly he meant by temporary, referring to all the lies and secret emails. His reply was sudden and angry as he shouted that I was nothing but a nag while he was drowning in his own problems. For a moment, I almost felt pity for him. Almost. The following morning, I went through our joint bank account and was shocked to see that the savings, $8,500, had vanished. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the list of transactions. Various ATM withdrawals, a wire transfer, and even a payment to a landlord I didn't recognize. When I demanded an explanation, he claimed there had been emergency repairs and insisted that I had blown through our budget. But I had been tracking every single dollar, and nothing added up anymore. It was all one big lie. At that point, Jen offered me her spare room for a few days to help clear my head. I hesitated because leaving felt like admitting defeat or confirming his mother's belief that I was overreacting. What if I was just misreading things, and this was merely a rough patch? Then came the incident with the concert tickets. Ryan gave them to me with a familiar grin, the one he used when surprising me with weekend getaways, and mentioned that the event was scheduled 2 months later, something to look forward to. That night, while he slept beside me, I secretly checked his email. After sifting through the usual spam and LinkedIn notifications, I found a confirmation for an Airbnb booking. It was made for one guest and was set for the same weekend as the concert. The next morning, I packed a bag with essentials, a toothbrush, some underwear, and the journal where I had recorded every single lie, and stashed it under the spare tire in my trunk, just in case. I even noticed that Ryan was wearing cologne today, which was odd because he never wears cologne. I don't really know what will happen next, but I'm done waiting for the truth to hit me like a sucker punch. This time, I'm determined not to let it catch me off guard. Now for the second update. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how someone I once shared a bed with could become a stranger so quickly. The apartment feels different now, as if the walls have absorbed every lie and every slammed door, just waiting to exhale. The day I followed him to the Airbnb, I told myself I was simply running errands, though I knew that sounded pathetic. Admitting that I was tailing my own boyfriend felt too raw and too final. His supposed business trip lined up perfectly with the dates he had booked that solo Airbnb, which I had discovered buried in his email. I parked across the street from the restaurant he had mentioned, a place that used to be very special to us, and watched him walking in with all the confidence of someone who hadn't spent months unraveling my sense of reality. Then I saw her. She was taller than me, and her laugh drifted through the glass as he held the door open. They sat by the window, and when he reached across the table to hold her hand, my body went cold. I took photos with trembling fingers on my phone before driving to my sister's place, the heater blasting even though it was 70 degrees out. Jen didn't ask questions. She simply pulled me into an embrace so tight I could feel her necklace pressing into my collarbone. She kept assuring me that I wasn't crazy, repeating it over and over like a mantra. I wanted to believe her, but part of me still wondered if I had somehow driven him to do this, if my neediness had pushed him away. Confronting him was more painful than I had imagined. I showed him the photos, but he didn't even flinch. He simply shrugged and explained that the woman was a colleague going through a divorce and that he was only being supportive. The word supportive hit me like a punch, and I remembered the same tone he used when he told me I was immature for wanting to spend time with my sister. I told him to leave, and that's when his true self emerged. He threatened to sue me for his portion of the apartment, his voice sharp as if he had been rehearsing his lines. I almost laughed, thinking that his share amounted to nothing more than 3 months of half-hearted Venmo payments while I covered the rest. The lawyer, Marta, was no nonsense. With a desk covered in Post-its, she skimmed through the lease, my bank statements, and the photos, then looked at me as if I were a math problem she had finally solved. She told me that I was entitled to stay, but warned me that he would fight dirty. I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt as if I really had a foundation to stand on. Ryan's parents dismissed the whole affair as a misunderstanding and offered me $10,000 to vanish, as if I were nothing more than a mistress in a bad movie. I hung up before they could finish speaking, my hands shaking. Later, while rummaging through his desk for the router password, I discovered a crumpled letter from his job, a final warning about missed deadlines dated 2 weeks earlier. All those late nights he had claimed to be working turned out to be lies because he had actually been unemployed. The realization hit me in waves. The drained savings account, the mysterious landlord payment, the way he had flinched when I asked about his demotion. It wasn't stress he was dealing with, it was shame. Changing the locks felt almost like breaking into my own life. Marta reassured me that it wasn't illegal, since he had effectively abandoned the place, yet I still half expected the cops to show up. When they finally did, it was Ryan who had summoned them. Standing on the porch, red-faced, he yelled about an illegal eviction while the officers scanned the lease. One of the officers, a tired-looking woman, inquired where his belongings were. He hesitated before mumbled that he traveled light. She glanced at the nearly empty closet, my name still on the lease, and informed him there was nothing they could do. The tire slashing was almost comical in its pettiness. I came out the next morning to find all 4 tires gutted by deep knife marks. Later, my neighbor Mrs. Ruiz waved me over with a thumb drive in hand. She explained that her Ring camera had captured everything and asked if I wanted her to call the cops. I didn't even hesitate. The restraining order was granted that same day. His arrest made local news, labeled as a domestic disturbance, a story that somehow reached his employer. By noon, he was fired. When Jen texted me the link to his LinkedIn profile, now marked as open to work with his bio scrubbed clean, I let myself cry. I wasn't crying for him, but for the part of me that once believed love meant swallowing your doubts just to keep the peace. Now the apartment is quiet. I've started rearranging the furniture, pushing the couch to where the TV used to be, and donating the rug he always managed to spill wine on. It isn't forgiveness. It's more like an archaeological dig into a past that no longer exists. I still don't know what comes next, but for the first time, that uncertainty feels okay. The locks have been changed, the air feels lighter, and somewhere out there, karma seems to have started keeping a running tab with my name on it. Now for the final update. It's been 2 months since my last update, and honestly, I never thought I'd get here. The kind of here where mornings don't begin with a pit in my stomach or an endless mental checklist of Ryan's latest lies. Therapy has been strange. Instead of the cliche of crying on a couch, it's felt more like untangling a knot I hadn't even known I'd been tightening for years. My therapist once asked what safety felt like to me now, and I couldn't find an answer. Now I think it's the silence, the kind that isn't weighted down by the anxiety of waiting for the next fight. After the restraining order, Ryan's mom called. Her voice wavered between guilt and desperation as she begged me to let bygones be bygones so that her son could move on. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But I'd spent too many nights staring at the ceiling wondering if I was the villain in someone else's story to just give in. I told her no and hung up before she could wear me down. Closure might be a myth, but saying no felt close enough. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into projects, volunteering for tasks I'd normally avoid, like leading client calls or mentoring interns. One day, my boss pulled me aside with an arched eyebrow, noting that I was different. I braced for criticism, but she smiled and encouraged me to keep going. The promotion came with a raise, not life-changing money, but enough to finally repaint the apartment. I picked a sunny yellow for the accent wall, a color that Ryan had once dismissed as tacky. Every brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. Then came the day I ran into the wife of one of Clara's clients at the grocery store. She recognized me while I was near the avocados and remarked that I was the one who had exposed him. There was no harshness in her tone, just a quiet honesty. Later, she admitted that he had almost cost her marriage before offering a word of gratitude. For a brief moment, we shared an understanding, and then she simply nodded and walked away. Jen moved in on a temporary basis after the court proceedings had settled. She would show up with takeout and the kind of bad reality TV that filled the quiet spaces of the apartment with her loud laughter and even louder opinions. One night, in the middle of a binge session, she mentioned that she used to dislike how quiet I became when he was around. I hadn't even noticed until then. We ended up staying up until 3 a.m., talking just like we did when we were kids, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty for needing someone. The lawsuit was messy but over quickly. My lawyer, Marta, discovered that Ryan had used my credit card to buy a $500 anniversary gift, a necklace I'd never even worn. He settled fast, probably hoping to avoid another round of courtroom drama. When the Venmo notification appeared stating that Ryan had paid me $500, I took a screenshot and sent it to Jen. She replied with a burst of celebration on her end. It wasn't the grand justice I'd once fantasized about, but it was something. I donated his leftover belongings to a shelter, old shirts, a nearly empty bottle of cologne, and those golf clubs he'd bought after his so-called promotion. At the drop-off, the woman smiled and nonchalantly mentioned that such things happened more often than one might think. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder if Ryan would ever catch a whiff of that cologne on someone else and flinch. Jen's idea to start a book club reminded me of who I used to be. It was a chance to recapture my old love for reading, a love that seemed to have been drained away long ago. The group meets at a small cafe downtown, and that's where I met Daniel. He's refreshingly normal, not in a boring way, but in the sense that he shows up on time, asks follow-up questions, and doesn't flinch when I mention my past. Just last week, he lent me his copy of a memoir, complete with dog-eared pages and notes in the margins. I'm not ready for anything serious yet, but it feels good to be seen as a person rather than some sort of project. Ryan's LinkedIn profile has become a ghost town. There's a sparse note about him being open to work. No headline, just a blank space where his once smug headshot used to be. Jen sends me updates whenever he reappears online. Most recently, a vague post mentioned that he was learning humility. Meanwhile, his mom's Facebook page shows him painting her garage with slumped shoulders. I don't feel happy about it, just empty, like witnessing a car crash that you're relieved to have narrowly avoided. My 30th birthday was understated. Takeout food, a few friends, and zero drama. Jen insisted on candles, so I blew out a single matchstick that she had stuck into a cupcake. We laughed until my ribs hurt. Later on, I found a voicemail from Ryan where he mumbled that he missed me over a backdrop of bass-heavy club noise. I deleted it and then blocked his number, and the finality of that act surprised me. I'd always believed I would need some grand gesture to truly let go. While cleaning out my closet last weekend, I discovered an old journal wedged behind some shoeboxes. Tucked between pages filled with teenage angst was a note from my mom telling me that I deserved light. She had written it after my first breakup when I was 16, and utterly convinced that I would die alone. I'd forgotten about it until now, and I ended up taping it to my bathroom mirror, exactly where Ryan's razor once rested. The salsa classes are every Thursday, and I'm terrible at them, always getting my elbows in the way and missing steps. Yet the instructor kept reminding us to value passion over perfection. Sometimes, when I'm caught in the middle of a spin, I imagine what his sneer might be like, as if he were questioning why I bothered, and that thought somehow fuels me. Not out of spite, but simply as a reminder that I can desire things he would never understand. I don't know what comes next, but I'm starting to appreciate the uncertainty.